Okay, greetings, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you all for attending the peer support through actionable feedback section. My name is Iman Nelson, and I will be moderating this session today. Our speakers will present for 30 to 35 minutes, and we'll have Q&As for 10 minutes before we end before the session ends. But this session will end at 2:55. If the presenters are not able to answer all your questions, please contact the presenters directly at the email that will be presented at the end of the last slide. Or if you did not get the presenter's email, you can contact them as Office of the University of Assessment by email, and they would gladly give you the presenter's email so you can ask your questions as you may, or if you have any new questions of that. But as a friendly reminder, this session is being recorded, and when you register for the conference, you provided consent for recording. If you do not want your likeness not to be published, please feel free to turn your cameras off right now at this moment. With all that being said, I will turn it over to the presenters for introduction and their presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right, perfect, perfect. My name is Keith Rivero. I'm an assistant professor at the College of Education in secondary education, and I'm here with Dr. Holt. Dr. Holt?
Yes, I'm Jerry Holt. I'm an instructor in the Department of Secondary Education, Technology Education and Foundations. And we are welcoming you to be in our session.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry.
Dr. Rivero is going to be the primary presenter, and I'm here for backup and for presentation of what my part of the project was.
Mr. Nelson, it says the screen sharing is disabled. Is there any way I could share my screen or?
Yeah, I got you. Sorry about that.
No.
There you go. You should be good now.
All right. Give me 1 second. All right, everybody can see it? Perfect. All right, so me and Dr. Holt, today what we're going to be talking about is actionable feedback, and in particular, giving each other actionable feedback, something that could be applied across the university, with faculty members, and with the overarching goal of improving student learning in our classrooms. And just kind of a brief overview before we get started. With the sense of actionable feedback, I mean, this is like a textbook definition that I have cited here. But in reality, when we start thinking of actionable feedback, it's just essentially what it is. We want our students to be able to, when we give them feedback or they make any kind of mistake, or even when they do something correct, is to continue to do it in the future, right? And it's a continuous look at ways for students to improve in certain concepts that we teach or skills that are valuable to whatever field that we're teaching. And in a lot of ways, actionable feedback is future thinking. What can we tell our students in terms of the feedback that we give them in order to improve whatever it is that they're learning in our classrooms? Now, if we could improve it in terms of how we give our students feedback, there's a lot of benefits that the research shows that comes with it, right? So one is improving student learning, right? If we're able to provide that kind of feedback, that students see exactly what they didn't do correct or what they could correct, and apply it in the future, it's going to help them learn all the material that we're teaching them, in particular, which I'll go into a little bit in more detail, things that are central or that serve as the foundation of the fields or the careers that they will be getting into. And a second part to it is increasing student performance. A lot of the times, in my particular classes, and I don't speak for everyone in the College of Ed, there's a lot of things that we do early in the semester that we do again towards the end, because it's something that once they're in the field, they will be doing on a daily basis, right? And we want to make sure when they leave our classrooms that they're actually be able to do this at an efficient level, right? And an effective level. We want them to be highly qualified teachers. And part of it is learning these basic skills that they learn in our classrooms. And again, improve how they do, from when they start to when they leave our classrooms and go into other classes, and again, even into the field. And then kind of like the golden holy grail for all of this, for us in particular, is that, and again, this could apply to any field or any college, and any faculty teaching students, is that hopefully by the time that they leave our classes, and they see the kind of feedback that we give them, and it's clear and concise, and I'll go through the different steps, that they themselves could evaluate their own work in the future. Once they leave the university, right? They're not going to be in our classes anymore. They're not going to have Dr. Holt, letting them know that this is not exactly how you do this particular skill, or how you write a lesson plan. They're going to have to be able to evaluate themselves in terms of the jobs and duties that they have while they're in the field. Now, for our particular goal, in this particular presentation that we'll be discussing, is improving our own feedback, right? We sometimes we get lost in the sense of, we give out grades, we tell them when something's incorrect or when something's correct, and kind of move on, and forget to give that valuable, actionable feedback that, again, is future thinking, and where they could apply these skills that they're learning in our classroom, and all these tied to our learning objectives and outcomes, that they could in the future, again, apply to whatever it is that they're going to be doing out in the actual field. Now, for us, the way that we approached it is we started with looking at what does the literature say about actionable feedback? What are some of the best practices, right? And we use that as a reference in order to create, well, I wouldn't say create, but adapt a rubric for our own use. And again, for us to be able to evaluate each other in terms of the feedback that we give our students, right? And again, I will go through, line by line, or each aspect or characteristic of that rubric, and how it actually looks with examples when we actually used it. And again, our whole purpose was, essentially to improve the feedback that we're giving students, right? And have them see what we're doing in terms of highlighting any misconceptions or errors that they made in any of the assessments that we give. And again, for them to be able to see how they could correct those mistakes or errors, and again, move on, right? And again, a lot of the things that we do in our classrooms is not one and done, right? They're going to be using these skills or this knowledge that we're giving them in the future, whether it's on a licensure exam, or again, in the field, which is, to us, more important than anything else. That when we release them out into the wild, if you will, to start teaching in their own classrooms, again, they're able to see maybe even go back to the feedback that we gave them, and use that as a guide for them to improve their teaching in the field. Now, and again, we reviewed the literature on actionable feedback, and tried to see it as a process. What are the best practices out there? We developed the rubric, and we used that as a guide in terms of evaluating each other's work, and not essentially looking at the assessments that we created, but the feedback that we gave students on those assessments. We discussed the specific assessments that we wanted to review. Dr. Holt and I share, a floor together. We're really close to each other in terms of he might be teaching a different subject area, but we're very familiar with things like lesson planning, or teaching a mini lesson, or even writing a reflection paper on a particular practice. So we were able to kind of specify exactly what are the assessments and what are the things that we wanted our students to improve in our actual classroom. Now, the next step is we actually gave each other the assessments and the feedback that we had given our students, and we only did one, right? Just one to start off, right? And it's very nascent in the process of we just started recently. But again, we gave each other the assessment. We knew the directions. We knew what the goals were for the assignment were, and then also highlighted the feedback that we gave to our students, right? And this is what we focused on, in terms of how we evaluated each other, because we were just focusing on what exactly are we doing with our own students in terms of the kind of feedback that we're giving them. Following those evaluations, we gave each other, our scores, if you would, and the feedback for the feedback that we gave our students, and essentially conducted a debriefing lesson, kind of to discuss our own individual evaluations, and kind of discussing where can we go from here in order to improve the feedback that we gave our students. Now, for the rubric that we developed, this is the exact rubric that we, again, I say develop, but adapted from those best practices. And we definitely have, a document that we could send out. I don't know if there's a repository after the conference that we could send this out to. But again, you could always email me or Dr. Holt, and we'll be happy to give this particular rubric for you. And if you see, it's not very, extensive in terms of how many lines or how many criteria that we're looking at. So it's something, our idea was something that was simple, easy to use. It's not going to take very long, and to essentially evaluate each other's work. We all are busy. We all have lots of grading that we have to do, and if we have to do student observations, if we have interns, and so on and so forth, presenting at conferences, we don't necessarily have a lot of time to do an extensive, 2-page paper evaluation where we're giving feedback to each other as faculty. So essentially, we wanted to have a single, one single 6-point rubric, if you will, with 6 criteria, where we could leave comments. And again, the whole goal is future thinking, right? This is not the end all be all and being judgmental of, the practices of your fellow coworkers, but essentially to improve student learning in the classroom. Now, in the next few slides, I'm going to go through each individual criteria so we could get a good idea of what we're looking at when we actually were looking at each other's assessments and our feedback that we were giving our students. So that's why I didn't read it all in one shot. So the first criteria that we were looking at is focusing on, and again, all this is based off the best practices in terms of feedback and giving actionable feedback, and again, could be applied towards from faculty to student or from faculty to faculty. In this particular sense, we used it faculty to faculty to improve our own performance and our usage and application of actionable feedback. But this first criteria was, focusing on being descriptive rather than judgmental. Right. Sometimes we get stuck in these loops where, where we see and we want to highlight to students, hey, they did something wrong. But sometimes we don't realize how it's could come out as judgmental, right? And I put 2 examples here, right? One on the left, I put the judgmental example, and then on the right, the more descriptive, the one that research says is the best practice, right? On one end, you have, hey, your objectives don't align with any learning outcomes in any way. It's obvious that you didn't put much thought into what you wanted your students to learn in this lesson, right? It's pretty harsh in the sense that you're kind of saying, hey, you didn't do a good job. But there nowhere there is any kind of description of exactly what exactly the person did wrong, or the person being assessed did wrong, right? There's not much that you could do with that as a student if you receive this kind of feedback, other than to know that you did something incorrect, right? But if you're a little bit more descriptive, like on the right hand side where it says the inquiry approach in this lesson helps students develop critical thinking and problem solving skills. Consider additional examples or questions that help support struggling learners to achieve your objectives and still encourage independence, right? This is a little bit more targeted, a little bit more descriptive, and the student, rather than getting upset or thinking they did a horrible job, they understand the areas where they did something well, but also areas where they could improve. And again, it's always that future thinking, where again, we're thinking of it as a way to how do we improve our practice? Some of the things that we're learning in the classroom and how we could improve it in the future is the intended goal. Now, the second criteria is being clear, concise, and specific in terms of the kind of feedback that we give students. This is focused more, on things that are not general, not abstract, and not super lengthy. I'm not going to read the example, the poor example, I should say, of this characteristic because it's long, right? If you get this kind of feedback on a paper, you automatically think you did something wrong, obviously, because there's so much written in there, but it gets lost, right? It gets lost in all of that text there, right? But If you look on the other side, it's saying the same exact thing in a lot less space, right? It's got bigger font and it's only one sentence as opposed to, you know, an entire paragraph, right? The student could look at this particular one on the right-hand side and say, okay, I know that in this particular example, if I'm teaching about participatory citizenship, maybe I should try to add real world examples in my future lessons if that is going to be the focus or topic of my lesson, right? You know, these kind of feedback, or this kind of feedback, is something that the student could use in the future when they are planning a lesson or any kind of teaching a lesson where this is the focus or the focal topic of that particular lesson. And again, the idea is to make it something, you know, short and sweet, right? I always say keep it short, keep it sweet. That way they understand and then they could move on, right? You don't want them to have to read an entire book just trying to gather information on what their assessment was and how they did, or how, you know, how poorly they did in this particular instance in terms of trying to teach this particular concept. Now, the next criteria is being able to focus on behavior which the learner can change, right? Sometimes, you know, we think of ways that we highlight things that students could do better, and we think, oh, well, you could have done this and you could have done that, right? And it was something that was completely out of reach, right? And I put this particular example of one that I've come across before, is that, you know, a student teaching out in the field, right? And they taught their lesson, and you know, and I might have done this in the past, where you said, you know what, if you had access to a smart board, you could have added videos to enhance your lesson, right? But they didn't have access to a smart board. So what can the student really do with that? Absolutely nothing, right? You know, chalk it up to, okay, so let's see if I could afford a $1,000 or however, you know, much a smart board is, you know, and there's no real way for them to actually apply this feedback, right? So, and sometimes we get locked into that, right? I put another example. The only way to effectively teach this lesson is for students to witness an actual court case in person, right? Again, not something that's really feasible. Of course, it's possible, but it might not be that easy to do, especially if you're on your internship. Of course, no one's gonna just have free access to any kind of courtroom cases where they could, you know, bust every student out there to see how the court system plays out if they're teaching civics. And again, the idea must, you know, when we focus on the behavior that we want our students to change, in particular to improve a particular skill or something that we're teaching in our classroom, is make it doable, right? Make it reachable, make it something that they could actually implement in the next time that they have to do this a particular activity, or show you this particular task. The next one is specifically identifying what is done correctly. We forget a lot of times that when we look at these assessments, we create them, we just highlight what they did incorrectly and never point out what they did, you know, correct, right? You know, and one of the things is that, you know, and I'm a big proponent of, is the power of praise, right? And I always like highlighting when students are doing something well. And the biggest reason I do that is because if it's something that they're doing well, I don't want them to change that, you know, and I want them to, I want to increase the likelihood that they will continue this behavior in the future, right? If they're doing something good and something correctly, and they've done exactly what the objective, or they reached the objective and exactly what I want them to do, I want to highlight that and let them know you did this well. This worked well in this particular lesson, or this worked well in this particular presentation, or whatever, you know, example you want to apply to it. But the idea is that they're going to continue to do this in the future, right? And then they could start focusing on the areas that they can or they could use improvement on. But again, you know, oftentimes I can't even remember a time, you know, me personally going through school where I was ever highlighted. Maybe I did a lot of things wrong, but I never got highlighted where, you know, where I did something right and said, oh, this was good. So I'm deficient in that area. Maybe I'm trying to make up for that, but again, you know, the research says that using this power of praise guarantees, I wouldn't say guarantees, but again, increases the likelihood of they will continue to display this desirable behavior. Now, the next one is points out and offers correction for any issue with the strategy, concept, or process. For this is highlighting those misconceptions, but offering a correction, right? Just saying, hey, this is wrong, you know, which some students have become accustomed to, you know, in terms of how they deal with assessments, in the sense that they see that they did something wrong, but they kind of just move on, right? But the idea is to show them, okay, I've highlighted this is what you did incorrectly, but now this is how you could fix it. Again, future thinking. That way, they could adjust it for the future when they ever have to do this same skill or apply the same knowledge that they learned in the classroom, whether it's in the field or in another class. The idea is for them to be able to correct it and see exactly what they made the mistake on. That way, they don't have to start thinking of like, I have no idea how to fix this, right? They could see the feedback and say, I know exactly what I have to do in this particular instance because I know what I was deficient in. For this particular example, and I'll read it real quickly, is, you know, we're talking about lesson objectives, right? I'm talking about lesson planning in this particular lesson, but don't forget to include the condition and criterion in the learning objectives section. The condition, right, here's the correction. The condition is what students will do to show you that they achieved the objective. And then the criterion is the standard performance on the condition to show you that they achieved your objectives for that lesson. The idea is you missed this particular portion that is very important in the objective section of a lesson plan or when you're writing a lesson plan. These are the things that are missing, right? And these are the things that what each stands for. That way, in the future, they could go back to this feedback, and let's say if they have to do a second lesson plan, they could go ahead and see, okay, I know that this is what I have to add, and this is what I have to add to my future objectives if I want to do it correctly and clearly and the way it's supposed to be. Now, one of the final criterias is being able to kind of initiate a dialogue with your students in terms of the feedback that you give, right? You know, encouraging deeper thinking about the concept, skills, and knowledge you want your students to learn, right? Instead of just, again, highlighting something and saying it's wrong, being able to ask a question where they have to respond, right? Well, I mean, I guess not have to, but try to get them to respond so they could see how they could fix or adjust whatever it is that they did incorrectly to, again, do better in the future or improve in the future. Things like, can you think of any other ways that would really get students excited about this lesson or topic you will be teaching, right? Or can you think of any other ways to grab your students' attention that gets them focused on the topic you will be teaching? Maybe a video, a game, a real world example. Again, you know, this is the idea is to engage them in a dialogue again, you know, in a way where they are seeing, you know, the feedback, they're digesting it, and they're seeing ways that, okay, I'm going to have to answer my professor or my instructor and let them know, okay, yes, you're right, I could have included. And then maybe you could say the next question would be, well, like what? What are some examples? And then once they offer you those examples, then you could give feedback to that too as well. But again, the whole idea is to improve the way that they're doing something that you're teaching them. Again, whether that's a concept or a skill, you know, you want them to be able to apply the information that you're giving them in order to correct that. Now, and after all those, you know, criteria, we had each other again evaluate what the feedback that we're giving our students, and based on that feedback that we got from each other, you know, I noticed, at least for me, and you know, and Dr. Holt, you could jump in, you know, whenever you want in terms of your own experience and your own reflection. But I focused my assessments that I wanted to kind of improve in terms of the feedback I give was on student lesson planning, right? How they plan lessons. This is something that for our students in particular at the College of Ed, they're going to be doing until they retire, right? It's never going to change. It's something they're always going to be doing. So I really want them to leave my classroom being, you know, to at least have a good idea of what a lesson plan not only looks like, but how they could craft one, and then how they could evaluate their own creation of a lesson plan and be able to improve it in that improves their own future students in learning. Now, based off the feedback that I got from Dr. Holt, you know, I saw myself providing more detailed and concise feedback. I got into that bad habit of writing paragraphs, right? Being just writing an entire. I wrote more about a lesson plan than they wrote about the lesson plan itself, right? So that wasn't a goal. It's really time consuming. And again, does it really help to provide, you know, a page worth of text in feedback to get the student to improve a particular aspect of a lesson plan, right? And you know, and again, as the research says, no, right? Sometimes they don't even read it, right? It's so long, they see it and they just kind of move on, right? And if you make it more concise, more detailed, they could see exactly and in short spurts exactly what they need to improve, and they could do it right away. Now, another thing was increasing dialogue with students. I guess that person didn't like what I was saying and left. But increased dialogue with students. You know, one of the things that I tried to do before was I always ask students questions of ways that they can improve sections of the lesson plan, but I never kind of, you know, followed up and tried to get a response, right? More often than not now, I try to encourage some more responses and encourage that dialogue and say, hey, do you remember when I said this on your lesson plan assignment? Right. So what are you thinking about that? Right. And getting them to kind of engage in that. So I want them to start thinking about how do we improve it? It's not a one and done thing. And we're continuing, we're going to do this again. Right. And this is for your future because you're going to be teaching in the field relatively soon. And I want you to be prepared for these kind of questions if you do get asked, and again, to improve your own teaching. And then also increase self-evaluation of my feedback in real time, right? I was being more critical of myself in terms of the feedback I'm giving my students. Is this clear enough? Is this, am I clear to the student when I'm giving them feedback? Am I highlighting what I'm supposed to be highlighting and being as detailed as possible, and without being overly, you know, wordy, those kind of things. And also, again, you know, when I sit down for, besides giving a grade, you know, my focus was more on student growth and improvement rather than trying to just give a grade. But again, always focusing on, you know, what the student could do to grow and improve their own practice and how they do things, and some of the things that I'm teaching them in the classroom. Again, future thinking and thinking about them, how they're going to be once they're alone in the field. Dr. Holt, did you want to add anything to that?
I don't have a slide, but very quickly I can uh, address what Dr. Rivero had given me for the feedback that I gave to my students. He said that sometimes I should be more clear because sometimes we get into a tunnel vision. We know we are supposed to know our subject area, so we know where we're going, but did the feedback that I give to the students, was it clear to them? And that's possibly one of the things I could work on, because the students supposedly are not experts on the things that we are supposed to be expert on. And another thing that Dr. Rivero had told me was, how does your feedback actually contribute to the student learning? So when we as peers, when we have our peer-to-peer interaction, it's a matter of, the can the student understand the feedback that you have given to them? So, thank you, Dr. Rivero.
No, not a problem. Not a problem. How am I doing for time, Mr. Nelson?
You're doing fine so far.
Okay, perfect. All right, so one of the things that I noticed in my own course was, you know, there was definitely an improvement. You know, I have my students, you know, and just to get a little bit more technical in the course, I have my students do a lesson plan and then a unit plan following, right? I want to see what they're doing first in a singular lesson plan before they start adding to it, right? And this is where I add a lot of that actionable feedback so I could see the improvement in the future. So even if they don't answer my questions when I, you know, try to engage in that dialogue, when I do give them that feedback, I want to see, you know, essentially that dialogue, you know, come out in that those future lesson plans that they write. But what I did know, you know, one of the things I had focused on that students in my, at least in my courses, tended to struggle with is the accuracy of creating, you know, clear objectives, right, with all the criteria that is required in those objectives. But I did see that when I started giving, you know, extensive feedback and actionable feedback, you know, with that particular section of the lesson plan, that I did see an improvement where I didn't have to make as many corrections in those future lesson plans. Of course, some still needed some improvement, and I would highlight that to make it a little better, but it wasn't necessarily the kind of extensive actionable feedback that I had to give in the future. So again, it's anecdotal, but in this particular sense, I saw an improvement and I thought it was a good improvement, which kind of leads me to my next one where I saw less repeat errors, right? I used to see a lot of the same errors over and over and over and over again, even after I gave the feedback. But when I made it more detailed and I focused on, again, future thinking and how to improve, and adding language where in the future I wanted to do this, right? I started seeing less errors when we start talking about things like attention grabbers, or icebreakers as part of their lesson planning. Other things was less repeated errors, when selecting their own assessments, right? A lot of the students struggled at first in their first lessons to have that clear alignment between the objectives they have for the lesson plans that they're creating and the assessments that they're using to see if they reach that objective. But after giving feedback in conjunction with the objectives, I even refer to the objectives within the actual feedback in that one document itself. But I did see, again, an improvement over the course when they had to do future lesson plans. I could see them actually applying what I was telling them in terms of how they could improve their practice in terms of writing these particular lesson plans. Now, for us, I thought it was beneficial. I don't know if Dr. Holt felt the same way, but I believe so. In the sense of, again, it kind of refocused me and recentered me in terms of the kind of way I approach feedback in itself and focusing on giving more actionable feedback than just highlighting incorrect or errors and areas where students need to improve. But again, things that they could focus on and actually work on to improve. Now, if you want to use it, and I know I'm speaking to a lot of people in College of Ed, but a way that we could use it is again, using that rubric, and of course you could adjust it and adapt it to whatever way you want to fit your needs in terms of how you apply it in your own area or your own college and your own floor, if you would. But my again, and these are just ideas and tips in terms of how you could use this rubric and use this peer-to-peer actionable feedback to improve teaching. But first, I would say find someone you trust to give you honest feedback. And I don't mean someone that you could confine in, but someone that is looking out in terms of how you could actually improve and understands your field, right? You might not have the same assessments, and it might not be the same exact field, but some generalized sense of that exactly what your goals are, and they could comprehend it. And you trust them to give you that critical feedback rather than just saying, hey, this is good or this is bad, but this is good, but this could improve it, or this is not that great, and these are the ways that you could do it. But again, always find someone you trust. Next, I always suggest make a plan with target dates, right? We all get busy. We all get pushed in 1,000 different directions, but making sure that you guys could create some target dates and stick to those target dates in order to have a reasonable time to be able to again discuss what was some of the key points that the evaluator pointed out, and how to improve that, because sometimes we get that feedback and even then we might not exactly know, okay, what's a real example of a way that I could actually apply this in my own practice. And then picking one specific assessment instead of doing a whole slew of assessments, pick the one that you think is really important in terms of your course, right? And that works in a sense where you could see the improvement throughout the year. Not doing several different assessments, right? It saves time in terms of the evaluator or your faculty member or coworker that you give the rubric to, and have them assess your own feedback. And this kind of focusing, okay, this is exactly what I'm going to be focusing on. I know the directions, but again, just picking one specific assessment that it could be a key assessment that you want to focus on, and that's what I would suggest. Another is again, the way that you approach it, when you start evaluating your own your fellow faculty members' use of actionable feedback, is focus on improvement and future application, right? And ultimately student learning, right? What can I do in terms of helping my fellow coworker improve how they give feedback to students? With the only goal to is to improve student learning in the classroom. Now, In terms of adaptability, you could use it in as an administrator. Chairs could use it with faculty in evaluations, peer-to-peer as the one that I discussed today. Even with teacher student, right? We're hopefully the whole idea is that you start applying, the concept of giving actionable feedback after doing a peer-to-peer evaluation of how we do it, and then even showing your own students how they could do it themselves, maybe even having them evaluate each other's work before they even turn it into you and practice giving actionable feedback, which in our field would help tremendously in terms of how they use actionable feedback and being able to practice it in the classroom. I think, and here are our references. I know I talk a lot. I talk pretty fast, but I guess it's questions. If anybody has questions.
Dr. Rivero, I would just add one thing to your excellent presentation in that our peer-to-peer interaction is ongoing. It's not just a one and done. It's not one thing that we do. Dr. Rivero and I do meet on a periodic basis. They're not scheduled, but we do meet to discuss our teaching practices and our instructional practices and how we can improve the instruction of our students so that when they go out into the classroom, they are prepared as teachers. So it's an ongoing collegial relationship that we have in providing feedback to each other. So if there are questions, you can ask Dr. Rivero or myself.
Well, I just want to thank the two of you for doing a great job. This is Dr. Pitts-Bannister. I like the idea. We always talk about in teacher education and education in general, this idea of lessening the gap between expert and novice individuals. So, and I like the idea of the actionable feedback in lessening that gap. One of the things that I realize when I attempt to engage in actionable feedback or provide it is that sometimes students may take the information and just do the action. So if I give them grammatical feedback of some type and give them some ideas of how they can improve it in their everyday writing, instead of taking that second component, they just deal with that first part. So this idea of lessening the gap between expert and novice, how do we help students actually really embrace the actionable feedback so they can become better individuals within their own practice and not just take something as an act to do at that moment, but see this as something that is a part of their evolution as an individual within the field?
Dr. Holt, or do you want me to answer that?
You would be the expert on that particular question.
I don't know about the expert, but for and if I and correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm not understanding the question, but when I was thinking of the idea of starting that dialogue and getting students to that golden place of being able to evaluate themselves, and again, not only just being able to just do the action, like, okay, I know I have to indent every first paragraph or whatever, or separate paragraphs, like the grammatical thing, but showing them exactly why. The hope is that when you do provide that feedback, that it gives them a reason, like why am I giving you this feedback? This is the reason why. And the research does say that there is that gap, that dialogue gap. What do they call? I forgot what was the gap where they see that the correction that you asked them to make, they might make the correction and you might have asked them a question, but they never get back to you, right? They just make the action and then it kind of leaves it there.
Right.
So, and I don't know what what would be a good answer or an example of, how we could get students we give them the feedback, they're doing the action, but do we really know that they got it? Is is that the sense of, I mean, if I get the sense of your question, that's what you were saying?
Right. That idea of evolving as that teacher or that practitioner that we want them to evolve into. So yes,
Yeah.
that
And,
just
and
for the
Dr.
help.
And Dr. Pitts-Bannister, one of the things that we try to emphasize is, okay, we have given you this feedback. Can you apply it to your future assignments that you're turning into us? Or do we have to go back over and give you the same feedback time after time after time? So apply what we have given you to future assignments, to future papers, to future things that you're going to turn into us. If not, then we possibly have failed the students in some way that we did not get through to them about application to future things that they'll turn into us.
And one of the things I do, and again, this is just anecdotal, but if I see like an error that's consistently, across the board for all, I wouldn't say all students, it never happens like all students, but a majority of students, I try to address that after and say, hey, remember, attention grabbers, I totally understand what you guys are saying, that clapping your hands and getting somebody's attention, that's an attention grabber. I totally get it, but that's not what I'm looking for, right? This is what I'm looking for. And then kind of getting into a conversation even before I start my next lesson, saying why is that the case, right? Why am I doing this, right? And trying to working it out with all the students in a whole class discussion. I guess it's time consuming if it would be like individual students, for every individual students you try, and if offering them the opportunity to, here, I'll explain why this is important, instead of just being able to do it, but I want you to know why. That way in the future, you could see yourself making these kind of similar errors and then correct it. But again, I don't have like a silver bullet to say, okay, well, this is exactly how you do it.
No, 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 no. Thank you so much. That was very helpful. Thank you.
I have one question regarding that. The topic is a peer support, right? That means you both support each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
It looks like a social science and also the English is more or less the same. If a different discipline, can you apply that to the, not the same discipline, or the just like a math or science, not the English and the social science? And also the peer, and also can be the students, the classmates, right? They support each other, they give a feedback. So that's my, since
Yeah.
you are all English and social science more close, if it's in science professor or math professor, how can you, still can you apply for that?
Mr. Gu, I think you do have a very good point there in that it is probably, I'm just thinking now, it's probably productive if the subject area instructors at least had some familiarity with each other. As you pointed out, the instructors and professors in science would be probably more, it would be more conducive to them to have their peer-to-peer interaction with someone in mathematics or closely related. But I do think that there possibly is a positive connection, even if you were to do some kind of crossover, because then we can learn from each other. I, as an English education instructor, could learn from someone in mathematics or from science if we were to begin to try to do those kinds of things. We can begin our learning process.
Yeah, and kind of hitting on what you said earlier too, Dr. Holt, in terms of like the expert idea, the concept of, we're speaking to novices, and sometimes we speak at expert and we use a lot of jargon, that could be even something. So for example, like somebody, let's say if I get a faculty member in pharmacy, I know nothing about pharmacy, right? I can't even spell pharmacy, but I'm sure that if they give me their assessment, and they say this is what students have to do, and they explain it to me, and then they show me their feedback, I could look at it and say, yes, I don't understand what these words mean or what this is in reference to, but I don't think this is clear, right? You said this, and that, but I understand language enough where I could say, oh, well, I think this could be clearer. I know that they have to know this and this, but you don't say how they could fix it, right? And I could say that as not being, again, have no idea about pharmacy, but I could still somehow be able to do that. Now, the only one thing that I would say is that it has to, at least it would work better where you can give that text feedback, right? If it's if it reaches only the level of being able to identify terms, or or get a, like mathematics, and Dr. Pitzmanister could probably speak to this, where you don't have to show your work, then it's probably difficult to give any kind of assessment in terms of the feedback that's given, right? It's in either right or wrong, right? Math is either right or wrong most of the time, and so that would be a little bit more difficult. So I guess it really depends, in terms of the assessment itself. If it's something where you can provide that feedback, and let's say somebody who's giving a math assessment, and they're asked to show their work, then that would be somewhere where you could highlight, I could see the error. This is the error in their computation. And then, okay, then I could work with that. But if it's just a correct answer, not correct answer, then that would be difficult.
Okay, no,
Yeah,
if
thank
it's
you.
no, oh, if it's no more questions, yeah, or if it's any more questions, you can always reach out to the presenters. They can provide their emails. But if it's no questions, y'all are free to leave.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rivera and Dr. Holt. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for the good presentation. It was very helpful and very good. I liked it.
Definitely.
Thank you both
Thank you.
presenter. It's good.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Did you need us in terms of, like, do we need to provide anything, or?
No, not at the moment. The least not. But I might email y'all about the rubric thing at a later date.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fine. Just let me know, and we'll definitely send it to you. Well,
Okay,
thank you very much.
you're welcome. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.